Hey everyone, Vincent Andriaki here, VP of Business Development at ISG Transportation. Welcome back to our monthly market pulse. Today, we're looking at what happened in June 2026 across freight markets in Canada, cross-border, and US domestic. In June, the market is feeling tighter. Produce season is in full swing, construction freight is active, cross-border enforcement is creating added pressure on certain lanes, fuel is still affecting all-in costs, and carriers are being more selective about the freight that they take on. So the theme for June is pretty clear. Capacity is getting tighter, planning matters more, and shippers need to be more intentional about how they secure coverage. Let's get into it. The Canadian domestic market continued to firm up through June. Earlier in the year, the market felt a little more stable. But now we're starting to see more operational tightness, especially as seasonal freight overlaps with fuel costs, labor constraints, and equipment demand. Tender rejection rates have moved higher, still sitting in the 8 to 12% range. Equipment and driver availability are tighter than they were in May, especially in Ontario, Quebec, British Columbia, and the key energy corridors. LTL volumes have stayed steady to slightly up, which is supported by retail and industrial activity. On the full truckload side, demand has picked up from produce, forestry, and construction freight. The challenge is that carriers are still being selective. Diesel is sitting around $1.89 per liter nationally, with some regions seeing higher spikes. That continues to affect lane pricing, fuel surcharges, and carrier decisions. We're also seeing the gap between spot and contract rates narrow. That is usually a sign that the market is starting to find more balance. And right now, it seems to be happening faster than a lot of people expected after a softer freight cycle that we've been in. A few Canadian lanes are worth watching right now. The Edmonton to Calgary and Fort McMurray corridor is seeing pressure from energy and industrial freight. Toronto to Winnipeg and the broader prairie routes are seeing seasonal westbound movement from manufacturing and retail restocking. Edmonton to Vancouver and interior BC hauls are being impacted by forestry, resource freight, and import-related volume. And Montreal to Halifax, along with other Atlantic lanes, are seeing firmer demand from consumer goods and seasonal freight. For shippers, the key takeaway in Canada is this. If you know you have steady volume heading into Q3, this is the time to start locking in dedicated or semi-dedicated capacity. When the market tightens, the shippers with stronger relationships, clearer forecasts, and better planning usually have more options. Now, let's talk about cross-border. Cross-border freight is becoming noticeably tighter in June. Northbound freight from the US into Canada stayed active, but southbound lanes became more challenging. A big part of that pressure is coming from the intensified US enforcement actions, especially involving Mexico to US flows. That has created driver reductions, delays, and added volatility in certain corridors. At the same time, the Supreme Court ruling is still influencing how the industry thinks about carrier selection and liability. There is a stronger focus right now on who's actually moving the freight. That means more attention on vetting, documentation, insurance, safety records, and compliance history. Northbound rejection rates have moved into the 10 to 13% range, and in some cases even higher. Southbound lanes have tightened because of reduced driver availability, added border complexity, and repositioning challenges. LTL has stayed steady, but carriers are pushing harder on fuel pass-throughs, accessorials, and compliance-related costs. For full truckload, northbound freight has been more reliable overall. Southbound has been more competitive and more volatile, especially in automotive, consumer goods, and other time-sensitive industries. A few cross-border lanes stand out this month. Ontario to Michigan and the broader Midwest remain under pressure, especially for automotive and manufacturing freight. Quebec to New York and other Northeast consumer good corridors are seeing stronger northbound volumes. Alberta to Texas and the Mountain States remain firm because of energy and resource-driven freight. BC to Washington and the Pacific Northwest are still active, especially for imports and perishables. For cross-border shippers, we work with carriers and partners that have balanced round-trip operations, strong compliance documentation, and clear fuel strategies. This is not the market where you want to treat carrier selection as an afterthought. Accountability is a major industry focus right now, and this is going to continue. Now moving into the US domestic market, the US stayed busy and volatile through June. Produce season, construction demand, and capacity constraints kept pressure high across several regions and equipment types. Dry van tender rejection rates have often been in the 16 to 20% range or higher. Reefer have been even tighter, often around 22 to 27% or higher. Flatbed has also stayed elevated, especially in construction heavy and produce heavy markets. That tells us that capacity is not as loose as it was earlier in the cycle. LTL has also firmed up as some shippers look at different ways to manage costs and capacity. Full truckload spot pricing remains strong, supported by diesel surcharges, carrier selection, and tight equipment in key markets. We're also seeing contract renewals come in higher, especially in lanes where capacity is already under pressure. Some of the biggest pressure points in the US right now are produce and construction heavy regions. California and Midwest produce lanes remain active. Southeast to Northeast and Florida routes are also seeing strong reefer and flatbed demand. Texas and Midwest nearshoring corridors are steady, but they're feeling some ripple effects from the enforcement activity. And across the upper Midwest, flatbed demand continues to be supported by construction and industrial freight. For shippers moving in these markets, lead time is important. The more notice you can give, the better chance you have of securing the right equipment, the right carrier, and a more controlled cost. June showed how quickly freight networks can tighten when seasonal demand, enforcement activity, fuel pressure, and regulatory developments all happen at the same time. Diesel is still volatile. Carriers are still being selective. Capacity is tighter than it was earlier in the year, and risk management is becoming a bigger part of everyday freight planning. For shippers, the playbook right now is strengthen your vetted carrier partnerships, make sure compliance is part of every conversation early. Build flexibility into your pricing strategy, especially around fuel surcharges, consolidation, and mode shifts. Plan ahead for produce, construction, and enforcement windows, and if you move cross-border freight, keep a close eye on USMCA developments and how they can affect your lanes, timing, and landed costs. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next Market Pulse.